Lesson 8. Preparing your system intervention. In this lesson, we will go through 3 practical steps that would allow you to start your journey on practicing systems thinking in your organization. It's important for us to start by mobilizing our people to be able to help us move the organization. We also need to take action on simple ideas so that people will feel that change is happening. And finally, you need to grow the change you wanted. Growing the change means sharing stories, creating effects, and redesigning the conditions or the organization as needed. Take note that change is a journey for the organization and you to take. In starting your intervention, no amount of effort individually can create the change you wanted. In order to make it happen, you need to mobilize your people. Let's recall our systems practice approach. In our previous lesson, we talked about defining our practice into 2 major phases. The first phase is where you clarify your system. This means that you have to understand the nature and context of the wicked problem that your organization is facing. You will also have to construct hypotheses of what the system is all about, what are the mental models, the biases, and other parameters that define how the problem is behaving right now. The second part of your systems practice is preparing for the system intervention. System intervention means that you have to now test your hypothesis, try some ideas in order to start creating the change you wanted. In order to start making your system intervention happen, we need to design the change on how you want to make it. First, it's important for us to look at designing the change environment of whatever it takes to shift the organization into a different behavior. It's quite important to begin by understanding how best to frame the change. Note that in your previous phase, you were able to understand the nature and the essence of the problem and the system. We now need to frame the change to be able to help mobilize the people. To mobilize the people, we need to frame the change and bring the people together in essence to help them become part of the change. This is what we mean by listening to the people. The succeeding steps will be to take actions by helping them co-create ideas and test ideas and learn along the way. And finally, to grow the change, we need to create and continue to share the stories of these small changes. Since systems thinking requires us to identify changes in our system that create a leverage or a shift in the behavior, it's important to now capitalize on getting the right people on board in order for you to test these leverages. What comes into mind would be to start a movement in your organization, hence the image of a picture on Les Miserables. In order to jumpstart your system intervention, think of it as you starting a movement in your organization. A movement is a group of people who share a purpose and who create the change together. In order for you to encourage people to join you in your movement, you need to think about framing the change. Based on IDEU, they've actually proposed that framing the change should be in 3 parts. Number 1, it should start with an emotional connection. Second, it brings in the logical aspect of the change. And third, it should end with something that is tactical and actionable now. Let's look at an example. How may we rally people to be more aware that there are food waste, and how do we promote less wasteful behavior. To do this, an example would be to start with something emotional and say, a lot of waste is thrown away and yet so many people are hungry. I remember when I was young, my parents and my grandparents would always tell me, eat your food because people are hungry in other parts of the world. The second part would be to introduce some logic or some numbers. And you can cite researches like, according to the standards that's being used when we look at our produce, we don't even want to buy a banana that is not perfect. And when it's imperfect or ugly, we throw it away, even though it's not bad. And finally, tactical could be to look at how can we start doing something now. We need to be able to challenge our movement, our people in the movement, to begin to change the way we do things now. In mobilizing people, the second part is to listen to them. Change cannot exist in your head. You cannot rationalize change and expect people to simply believe or follow you. There are two groups you need to consider when you try to introduce a system intervention or change. Look at those people who will be affected, and those are people who's going to help you push the change. When we look at our stakeholders in general, you could consider three kinds of people you need to include in your movement. These are the enthusiasts, people who are, when you say something, an idea, they grasp into it and they would be passionate about it. But take note that not all are willing to volunteer. You have the sponsors who need to support you, or you need support from them, because they will give you the power, the access to resources. And of course, the last one, these are the naysayers. These are the people who are negative people. They will be skeptics. They are negative to change or adverse to change. So what you need to do now to mobilize people, to create the movement, is that you need to create a coalition of co-conspirators. You need to bring a collection of these people in your group. You cannot have only enthusiasts nor sponsors without naysayers. Naysayers can tell you much about how to address the negative aspect of change. A second important aspect of preparing for the change or your system intervention is to take action now. It's so easy to see that it's going to take so much time to change the organization, or to be able to convince everybody, or to even allow people to start making the change. Taking action oftentimes becomes difficult because it's never easy. In order to start to take action with your interventions, you need to bring your co-conspirators to co-create ideas. In this step, we want to seek small, tangible wins that can show progress so that others will be excited to join the movement. We call these small ideas beacons of change. The goal here is to help co-create success beacons, like small lights, so that people will see the change is happening now. People will support what they create, so inviting them into the process is a way to build momentum for the bigger change to happen. Small ideas can be brainstormed and become potential beacons. The goal is to get people to notice that change is happening. When looking for beacons of change, look for ideas that create energy, excitement, and an ease of making it happen. We want ideas that will turn around and create passion. We want ideas that can create a buzz, some word of mouth. And then finally, it has to be easy, so easy to do that people will say, why not? Remember that when you talk about systems thinking and practice, the goal is to be able to eventually implement a change in the structure of the system. But since you're starting with small changes, which we call beacons, it's just normal that these ideas are never perfect nor complete, nor do we want them to. So as we now create beacons of ideas to make people feel change is happening towards that main change you wanted or intervention, we get to test ideas and learn from them. This is where we experiment and learn how people feel about changing and shifting the organization slowly. The goal is to choose one to begin working on now. Build it and see how people feel about it. And finally, most importantly, we need to reflect on the testing of our beacon. What happened? What challenges do you see? Any hiccup or tension? What was difficult about it? Was it easy? These things will help us create the necessary change later on and impact the entire organization. The last step in preparing for your system intervention is to grow the change that you have started slowly. We start by bringing in the people we wanted. We created co-conspirators and mobilized them. We allow them to help us co-create small ideas to start the fire burning. Now we're ready to grow the change. And growing the change means looking for things that will fast track or create a snowball effect on the changes that you've started to begin with. In this day and age where we talk about social media, the internet, one of the most important influencers or creators of a viral story is to actually share a story. And what we wanted to do is to grow the change, you need to craft and share a story. You need to be able to deliver a human story so that people will feel connected to it and feel that it is important. If not, more important than the actual change. People are so easily attracted to small stories that gives inspiration, hope, the future on how it might be. In a business setting, we rely on proving our points using data, which is a typical practice in any organization. But if you want to move and create the change, you need to help people imagine the future and tell a moving and compelling story. Start with small stories to share, and these stories will build up to becoming a long and large novel of change for the company. Once you start with a story, you need to continue to create small stories. Allow the stories to create a snowball effect. Stories are an important ingredient to growing your change. Characteristics of good story should be number one, it should not be a lie. It should not be creating a big thing about nothing. It should be rooted in action. Something was done. It is relatable and personal. It illustrates a journey of what has to be done or what was taken, and it ends with a call to action, like asking for help. Tell big stories about the small things you've done. One of the fable or parable or a story I remember is the brave little tailor who said that he killed a set of flies in one swap, okay? and that eventually became a legend for him. It's not about a lie or a white lie. It's about highlighting that small things matter. Now that you've created the growth through the stories you have started with all of these beacons for change, you now go back to the intervention we wanted. We need to now look at how we may redesign the conditions in order to grow the change that you have started with your co-conspirators. Remember to tell stories about the things that you have done to continue to recruit more people. It does not stop with who you have now. You cannot design the culture, but you can shift the culture with more and more people coming on board. The goal is to be able to redesign the structure based on the concepts of systems thinking that we have discussed in the previous lessons. Take note that the need to be able to make the change, we need to sustain the movement. Now, redesigning the structure can be followed using Jay Galbraith's STAR model, where he talked about introducing interventions as a strategy, or the structure or the org structure, the processes, or the infrastructure like the systems or the IT, or the people themselves, or incentives to create more motivation. All of these components will now be ideas you can use to influence the leverage points that you have seen in your system map early on. Finally, when we now look at the change that we wanted to happen in the organization or in your system, we look at change as a journey. It doesn't happen overnight. As the company grows, so must its people. And oftentimes, we always look at changing the structure, but forgetting that the people is part of that structure. It's important for us to guide and support the growth of the people in that organization. This is often a major leadership challenge. So when we now want to create the change and continue the change, we have to keep in mind that we have to also help the leaders on how they might inspire or how they can help sustain the changes at their level. Change cannot happen without friction. Looking at the Kubler-Ross change curve, all changes go through a dip, as you all know. When you try to pursue a personal goal of even, say, reducing your weight, there will always be a point where you wanted to give up. All change is the same. Everything starts with a denial, going into some sort of frustration before being able to overcome it. We look at the change journey as a gift. It reveals the conditions you need to evolve to support the change. And change is not about the structure, but even the change that leaders need to do. As we continue to take the journey of change, I'd like to recall a quote by Winston Churchill. He said, "We shape our buildings. Thereafter, they shape us." I hope that all of these lessons, starting from understanding how we think systems to how we practice systems, would allow us to now seek and do the changes that's needed for our organization. Some key messages for this lesson. Mobilize people to help you grow the change in your organization. You need to take action by working on small changes that will get more people to pay attention to the changes that needs to happen. And finally, growing the change or intervention means a redesign on the structure. Redesigning structure will always create friction and an opportunity to learn how to deal with this friction.